Hello everybody and welcome to Baiju 6th, 7th and 8th grade channel. I'm your biology teacher Aishwarya, and in this particular video we are going to be covering the chapter from NCERT grade 7 Nutrition in Animals, and we will be doing a chapter summary for this particular chapter in just under 30 minutes, and this will be as a part of our ongoing series that is Crash Course on our channel, so do definitely check it out. Now, if you are a new subscriber to our channel or you've stumbled upon this particular channel wondering, hey, what goes on here and why is it that this particular teacher is starting off with a chapter summary? Well, let me tell you, we have done in detailed explanations for this particular chapter already on our channel. So you will find the whole chapter one shot and you will find individual modular videos for each of the main topics that are covered in this particular chapter. So you can definitely go check these out as well. The link will be pinned again on top, so you can click on the links above. And if you are wondering what is Crash Course and why are we having this particular series running on, then let me tell you. Now, if you are a new subscriber, then this is very important for all of you. But for those of you who are very regular to our channel, in the meanwhile, make sure that you go ahead and like this video and do not forget to hit the bell icon for more updates. Now, Crash Course is a part of our series where we believe that this is the place that you can find everything that you need for your exam preparation. Now, as annual exams are lurking around in the corner, we want to make sure that our students are well prepped for the annual examination, because we believe the champions are made here on this particular channel. So what we have done is to curate a plan for all of you so that you can ace your exams. So what we'll be doing as a part of it? We will make sure that we revise all of your syllabus. We will make sure that we give you chapter summaries, which is what this video is all about. And along with that, we will be giving you prep tests. We'll be providing you with session PDFs for, effective study. And along with that, we will be having a lot of practice with subjective, objective, exam hacks, mock tests. So we will make sure that we get you end to end with respect to your preparation so that you ace your exams. Now, if you truly believe that Baiju 6th, 7th and 8th is the place where you need to be for your examination preparation, I request you all to quickly hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon, and do not forget to like this video, because that's how you show us your love. And with this, of course, without wasting any more time, I am going to jump right into the chapter that is Nutrition in Animals. Now, when we talk about nutrition in animals as a chapter, right, we see that there are three things which come into our picture. So the first thing that we will be talking about is nutrition in humans, right? So we will be talking about nutrition in humans and how that happens. Now, this is the first thing. Now, the second thing that we will be doing is talking about cows, or I would use the term ruminants here. And we will understand how is this different from what we have learnt about in humans. And last but not the least, we will be talking about nutrition in unicellular organisms like amoeba. So these are the three things that we are going to be covering today. But before I jump right into telling you about all of these things, we need to first have an understanding of what does this word nutrition mean. Now, we know that nutrition can be simply defined as the process by which we take in food and we utilize it for growth, for development, for obtaining energy, and so on and so forth. Now, why is food important to all of us? Because we know that food is the fuel that drives our body. And within food, we see that there are various nutrients which are present, which provides us or helps us in growth, development, obtaining energy, so on and so forth. Now, when we talk about nutrients, we have again macro and micronutrients. Now, macronutrients is mainly includes your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. While your micronutrients that are there mainly include your vitamins and minerals. Now, looks like it's very simple. Take in the food, your body utilizes it, and well and good, we are done with our work. But the thing is, most nutrients, especially our macronutrients, I would like to stress on that. Our macronutrients that are there, they exist in complex forms, right? So we see that they exist in a form that cannot be really utilized by our body directly, okay? So this complex form cannot be utilized directly. Which is why the first thing that needs to happen to the food is certain processing, where this complex form is converted into simpler forms, but simpler soluble forms, right? So you can think of it like as a factory. Now, when you talk about any factory, For example, let's say maybe a factory that makes, clothes, right? Your raw material is cotton. And we cannot just take cotton as it is and stick it on our body and say it becomes clothes. It needs to be converted into a form which can be used by us, right? And we see that there will be many machines that will come together and that will help you do this. So we see that different things are coming together and at the end of the day is enabling us to get it, or maybe a type of cloth. So now you can think of that to be happening inside our body, right? Now food is there, but food is not going to be in a usable form. It needs to get converted into something which can be used by our body, which is where the human digestive system comes into the picture. Now, why am I using this word system? Because this digestive system is made up of many parts, right? It's made up of many different parts, or I would say many organs that come together and facilitate the process of digestion. Now, when we talk about nutrition as a whole, right, I just use the word digestion. Now, digestion is one part of many steps that takes place in nutrition. So when I simply say nutrition is a process of taking in food and utilizing it, it's not a single step thing, but rather it's a 5-step process, right? And your step number 1 is ingestion, where you take in the food, right? So process of taking in the food into your body is what we call as ingestion, where once the food is taken in, we break it down into pieces. So we first physically break it down. And once that has happened, step number 2 takes place, which is digestion. Now, the definition of digestion is very, very important on an examination point of view, and steps of nutrition are also important on an examination point of view. So you can put a star mark next to both of this. Now, what do we mean by digestion? Digestion can be simply defined as the process of breakdown of ingested food into simple absorbable forms, right? So I'm just going to rewrite this into a simpler one. So digestion is defined as the breakdown of nutrients into, or complex nutrients into simple soluble forms. Now we see that it starts off in the mouth as well, right? And it takes place across different parts of the digestive system. And finally, when digestion is fully complete, right, all your nutrients are now broken down into simple soluble forms, we see that they then need to be taken up by the body. Because see, it's not that only the digestive system will utilize these nutrients. We see that it needs to go to different parts of our body so that they can be utilized. Now, who is going to do that job? That job is going to be done by the blood, right? So the blood is what is going to transport all of this. So now your simple forms of nutrients need to enter into the blood. And that takes place by the process of absorption. And once it is absorbed, the blood will transport these nutrients to different parts of our body where they will be utilized for obtaining energy, for growth, and for various other chemical reactions and chemical activities that takes place within our body. And this process is what we call as assimilation. So what is assimilation? It is the part where I'm saying we are utilizing it, right? And for what would we utilize? We are utilizing it for energy, for growth, for development, right? Now, of course, once all of this has happened, we see that's not like the full, whatever we eat, everything is utilized. There are parts of it that we don't need by us, right? There's some parts which are undigested, not required by the body. So whatever is undigested, first and foremost, will not get absorbed. And what will happen is it will move into the latter parts of the digestive system where eventually it will be removed out from our body. And this removal of undigested food material from the body is called as egestion. So you start with ingestion, followed by digestion, absorption, assimilation, and egestion. So these are our 5 steps of nutrition, and we will understand how they all fit into our digestive system and how our digestive system facilitates all of this, right? So let's get started with the human digestive system. Now the human digestive system has 2 parts, okay? So I'm just going to write DS here, a short form for digestive system. Now it has 2 parts, which first includes the alimentary canal. And then, of course, it includes accessory glands, or sometimes associative, but accessory glands is the better one, right? So we have these 2 parts of the digestive system. Now, the alimentary canal is actually a long, continuous tube that starts with the mouth and it ends with the anus, right? So it has mouth, then you have your esophagus, your stomach, small intestine, large intestine, ends with the anus. So it is one continuous tube. While the accessory glands that are there are glands which are not part of the alimentary canal, but they pour their secretion into it, right? So we see that they pour their secretion into it, which mainly includes liver, it includes gallbladder, and it includes the pancreas. All right, and we see that together they make up the digestive system of our body. So let's get started with the first part of the alimentary canal, which is the mouth, or often known as the buccal cavity. Now, buccal cavity is nothing but the mouth, okay? So don't get confused with both of these terms. And these three in turn are made up of three parts. So we see that it is made up of teeth, it has tongue, and saliva. Now, the teeth that are there in our body, of course, in an adult human, we see that there is a total of 32 teeth, and we have 4 kinds of teeth. Now, why do we have 4 kinds of teeth? Because of the diet that we eat, right? Humans are often considered to be omnivores who have the ability to eat both plant-based food as well as animal-based food. Now, because of the kind of diet we eat, we see that we have these 4 kinds of teeth that include incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Now, the incisors that are there, they help in biting into the food, while the canines that are there help in tearing into the food. The premolars and molars help with chewing and grinding the food, so that physically the food is now broken down. And in order to move the food around within our body, we also see that the tongue plays a key role in making sure that the food can be moved around within the mouth, and it helps in mixing it with this watery secretion that is produced in our body, which is saliva. Now, saliva is produced by a pair or 3 pairs of salivary glands. Now, we see that there are salivary glands located behind our ear. We see that's located behind our lower jaw. And of course, we see that there's a pair below our tongue. And this produces this watery secretion called saliva. Now, saliva not only binds all the necessary food particles or the broken down food particles, but we also see that saliva has a chemical substance in it. And this chemical substance is what we call as an enzyme. Now, on an examination point of view, you don't need to dwell deep into what is an enzyme, but just for your understanding, an enzyme is a chemical substance which takes part in a chemical reaction. Okay, so if a chemical reaction is taking place, this enzyme will be like, hey, let me help you out, okay? So it will help it out, making sure that the chemical reaction happens faster. But what it will do, we see that it will not really take part in it, right? It will just facilitate the whole process, which is what this particular enzyme does. So we see that salivary amylase, what it will do is it will actually start facilitating the process of digestion. Now here mainly we see that digestion of carbohydrates take place, all right? Now we know that one type of carbohydrate is starch. Now starch is a complex carbohydrate that our body cannot really use, which is why this starch gets converted or it gets broken down into smaller particles, okay, or simpler forms. And in this case, it gets broken down into maltose. Now, who is responsible for doing this? It is your salivary amylase, which is what we call as an enzyme. So saliva here is very, very important. Now, along with this, we see that I told you it binds the food particles together. So the saliva and the chewed and broken down food together gets mixed with the help of the tongue, and it results in the formation of a bolus. And we see that this bolus is then swallowed. And once it's swallowed, it will move on to the next part of the alimentary canal, which is the esophagus, which we often call as the food pipe. Now, once it reaches the food pipe, we don't really have control over the movement of food within the alimentary canal. So from the food pipe, we see that the movement is almost on its own. And we see that the food is pushed down with the help of a wave-like rhythmic contraction and relaxation. Because at the end of the day, we see that, the walls of the food pipe have muscular lining in it. So relaxation of muscles which are found in the walls of the alimentary canal. And we call this wave-like rhythmic contraction and relaxation of the muscles as peristalsis. Now, one important thing to understand is that peristalsis is, of course, not only found, or is not the only movement seen in the esophagus, but it's seen or observed across the alimentary canal. And from here we see that it is passed on to the next part of the alimentary canal, which is the stomach. And here we see that within the stomach the food is further processed and churned. Now we see that the stomach that is there is a J-shaped flattened bag-like structure wherein the food is processed within the stomach for about 4 to 5 hours. Now the stomach produces something called as gastric juice. Alright. So it produces something known as gastric juice. Now the gastric juice has 3 things. First and foremost, it has hydrochloric acid. I'll write the full form here. It has hydrochloric acid. Then of course it produces mucus and it produces certain enzymes also. Alright, and we don't need to get into the details of these enzymes. Now of course when we talk about hydrochloric acid, it serves 2 functions. So if at all we see that when we swallow the food, if there are some unwanted particles that may enter along with the food, then the hydrochloric acid will damage it and it will get rid of it. So the first and the primary function of hydrochloric acid is to get rid of any unwanted particles that may enter along with it. Now along with that, we also see that hydrochloric acid is necessary for activating enzymes. Okay. So the thing is, whatever enzymes are present in the stomach, they exist in a very inactive form. Okay. They are not always active and ready to do, its work. They exist in an inactive form. They will only get activated when food enters. Right? And when food enters is also when your hydrochloric acid is produced in large amounts. Which is why we see that hydrochloric acid is responsible for activating these enzymes. And what do these enzymes in the stomach do? They perform a very important function. They convert or they act on proteins. So in the mouth it was carbohydrates. Now in the stomach it's your proteins. And we see that the proteins will now get broken down into smaller substances or smaller particles called as peptones. So here I'm not saying smallest. I'm still using the term smaller. And it is not that smaller particles can be utilized by our body, right? So one thing to understand is that these smaller particles cannot be utilized, but it's a process. But they are now complex has become slightly less complex. That is the idea here, right? So we see that they will get converted into peptones and peptides, right? Don't need to know the terminologies much. This is just for your understanding. Now we know why HCl is there and why enzymes are there. Now, why is it that the stomach is producing mucus? What is the purpose of it? And remember, this is a question that will most likely come in your exams where they will ask you the function of mucus in the stomach. Now, remember that your stomach is producing acid. And acids can be corrosive. They can damage it as well, right? They can damage the inner linings. Which is why here what the mucus does is it will protect, right? So, the function of the mucus is to protect the inner lining of the stomach from the acid, from hydrochloric acid, so that it doesn't get damaged. So please put a star mark next to this as well. So now we see that 4 to 5 hours, a lot of churning and processing is taking place. Now once the food has been churned and it's been processed, it will now move on to the next part of the alimentary canal, which is the small intestine. Now the small intestine is highly coiled and it is very long. And it is called as small intestine because of the diameter of the tube, right? So we see that it is highly coiled and it's a long tube. And we see that the diameter is relatively smaller, which is why we call it as a small intestine. Now small intestine serves 2 functions, okay? So first and foremost, we see that the small intestine receives secretions from the accessory glands, okay? So we see that the small intestine is where we see that it receives the secretions. Second thing is, once it receives the secretion, partial digestion takes place. But later on, as it moves throughout the small intestine, we see that complete, right? Further in the small intestine, complete digestion of food takes place. Now, once complete digestion takes place, we see that the process of absorption also happens here. So the small intestine is a very happening place wherein so much is happening. So let's start with the first thing where it receives secretions. Now the initial part of the small intestine or the initial region of the small intestine receives secretions from the liver and the pancreas. Now the liver of course is a large gland which is there, which is located in the abdominal region, and it produces a secretion called as bile juice. Okay, so it's a greenish yellowish fluid which is produced. Now the thing is, So far when we discussed, we spoke about digestion of proteins and digestion of carbohydrates. But nowhere did we talk about the digestion of fats. Now the reason being that fats especially exist in the form of large fat globules, right? So the size of the fat globules is such that the enzymes cannot really act upon it. It's too big for an enzyme to act on it, which is why first and foremost they need to get broken down into smaller droplets. So size wise they need to get broken down. And this process of breakdown, so this is a very important definition, you can put a star mark as well. So we see that this process of breakdown of large fat droplets, or you can say fat globules, into smaller droplets is what we call as emulsification. So what is emulsification? It is this process of conversion so that we see that the process of digestion of fats can take place. So this is facilitated by the bile juice which is produced by the liver, right? So bile juice facilitates emulsification process. And we see that apart from that, it also makes the food alkaline. Now, whatever excess of bile is produced, right? So, excess of bile is then stored in the gallbladder, which is used as and when necessary. So, this was all about the liver and the gallbladder. Now, we also have the pancreas. Now, we see that the pancreas is again located in the abdominal region behind the stomach, and it's like this leaf-like organ which is there. Now, the pancreas again produces something known as pancreatic juice. Now, why are we calling this as pancreatic juice? Because we see that it does not produce only one enzyme, but it produces a mix of enzymes, okay? So many enzymes are produced by the pancreas which acts on carbohydrates, it acts on proteins, and it acts on fats as well. And we see that partial digestion. I'm using the word partial because the food is still not completely digested. We see that starts taking place here. And we see that further on, once partial digestion has taken place here, the food will move further down into the small intestine. Now, the latter parts of the small intestine also produces something known as intestinal juice. And now you know, right? If I say juice, it means that it is a mix of enzymes. Yes? And we see that in this case, intestinal juice also acts on the food, wherein finally complete digestion of food takes place. Now, what do I mean by this complete digestion? So, we see that the carbohydrates which exist in the complex forms will become converted into simple forms like glucose and, fructose and so on, right? Now, along with this, we see that the proteins that are there will get finally converted into simplest. So, these are all the simplest soluble forms that I'm talking about, right? So in this case, we see that the proteins that are there will get converted into amino acids, and the fats that are there will get converted into fatty acids and glycerol, right? So this conversion takes place. And once this conversion takes place, we see that the next step takes place, which is absorption. So your step number 2 in steps of nutrition is done across from the mouth till small intestine, that is digestion. Now once digestion has taken place, it's time for step number 3, which is absorption. Now we know that the food needs to get absorbed into the bloodstream. Now to facilitate faster absorption, we see that the inner lining of the small intestine is made into finger-like projections, right? Or finger-like foldings as you observe right here. And these finger-like foldings is what we call as a villi. Or if I were to talk about a single one, it is called as a villus, and many is what I would call as villi. Now they will ask you a question on this. It's almost guaranteed on why are there villi in the small intestine, or how do villi help in the absorption of food. It's a very simple thing. Now we see that they are made into these finger-like projections to increase the surface area, right? So this is done to increase the surface area for absorption, so that at a for lesser time, large amounts of food can be absorbed, right? Or large amount of these nutrients can be absorbed. And we see that these villi that are there, they are richly supplied with blood vessels, right? And we see that because of this, when the food enters, they will directly enter into the bloodstream. And then the blood will transport it to different parts. So all of these substances have now been absorbed into the bloodstream. And we see that once it is into the bloodstream, the blood will then transport it to different parts of the body, where glucose is utilized for the production of energy. We see that amino acids that are there are used as, body building blocks, and of course for producing various other proteins, right? And of course we see that the fatty acids and glycerols are also used for producing various components that are there. So now you know that all of them are now finally utilized. Now assimilation has also happened. Step number 4 has happened, leaving us with last step, which is step number 5. So after absorption takes place and blood transports it, remaining undigested food will now move into large intestine. Now the large intestine is called so only because of its diameter, right? Because we know that diameter wise, it is slightly larger when compared to your small intestine. So that's your main point of difference here. Now in large intestine, of course, we see that there is some reabsorption. So there might be some amount of water, maybe some vitamins, which wouldn't have gotten absorbed, right, in the small intestine due to whatever reason it may be. So if at all that has not gotten absorbed there, we see that reabsorption will take place here. And we see that whatever undigested food that is there, parts of the food that our body is incapable of digesting, it will then move on to the rectum, right? So rectum is a part of the small intestine where the undigested food is briefly stored, and then finally it is egested out of the body through the anus in the form of feces, right? So we get rid of it and we call this process as defecation. So with this, of course, if you see, we have come to an understanding of how the food that we eat is ingested, digested, absorbed, assimilated, and whatever is unnecessary is egested out from our body. So this was all about nutrition in us humans. But is this the same for all organisms? That is where our next part of the chapter comes into the picture. Now, what about an animal like a cow, or maybe in the case of herbivores, right? Do they have the exact same mechanism? Now, here, one thing to understand is that the diet of an organism plays a key role. What they eat primarily. So, when you talk about herbivores, we see that they mainly eat plants, right, or plant-based food. Now, the thing with plants is that they have a substance known as cellulose, all right? And we see that the digestive system in animals, especially in our body, and in the case of cows also, we see that they're not really capable of digesting this cellulose, okay? So in this case, if you see, digesting cellulose for herbivores becomes very tough, but yet they still feed on it. So how exactly are they able to do this? That is where their digestive system gets, I would say, modified to facilitate it. So in the case of cows, we see that they primarily eat plant-based food. And we see that their, teeth that are there mainly have broad, flat teeth that help with cutting and chewing and grinding. They don't really have canines per se that will help in tearing. But on the other hand, carnivores will have big canines that help with tearing, right? And in this case, what will happen is once they feed on the food, we see that it is then taken to different parts of the stomach. It's then swallowed into the esophagus, and then it will go on into the stomach. And here the stomach is a 4-chambered one, right? So it's not a single flattened structure, but it's 4-chambered. And here we see that especially one chamber that we need to be concerned with is the rumen. Now the rumen has various kinds of microbes, or they have different kinds of bacteria. And we see that this right here is very important because they have bacteria like ruminococcus that help in digesting the cellulose. And we see that once these bacteria act on the plant, a plant-based food, cellulose gets digested and now the food is partially digested. And once the food is partially digested, it is then sent back, or it is regurgitated back into the mouth for further digestion. So this particular process wherein partially digested food is sent back into the mouth for, it is regurgitated back into the mouth for further digestion is what we call as rumination. And organisms that exhibit this is what we call as ruminants. And then of course, once it has been, this process takes place, it is further broken down, sent back into the body, where it then bypasses the first 2 compartments, moves into the last 2 compartments of the stomach, where digestion takes place, and then the process continues. So this particular part on how it is different from our body is what you need to focus on. Definitions of rumination, ruminants are very, very important. And last but not the least, we are going to have a quick look at the third and last part of it, which is nutrition in amoeba. Now, amoeba is a single cell organism that does not have any organ in it, right? So how exactly is it doing it? Now, in the case of amoeba, it does not have a proper shape, right? So it has no proper shape and it is unicellular. Now, the fact that it does not have a proper shape is what it uses to its benefit, wherein we see that it will make certain projections out, which we call as pseudopodia. And we see that what this pseudopodia will do, it will extend as false feet, okay? So they pretend to be like false feet, or this is literally the translation of what pseudopodia mean, and they will extend out. So when they come closer to the food, the pseudopodia will extend out and it will form a trap, okay? So this will act as a trap and then it will ingest it into the body. Now within the body, this will result in the formation of something known as a food vacuole. Now within the food vacuole, we see that digestion takes place where the food is now broken down, and we see that once the food is digested, it is then absorbed into different parts of the amoeba's body, and then of course it's assimilated or utilized, and then finally of course we see that whatever is undigested is ingested out. So your key points in amoeba is these two things. How false feet help in the formation of food vacuole, and everything takes place, like especially the digestion takes place within the food vacuole, then it is absorbed, and then of course assimilation and ingestion takes place. So this is your main point of difference. So with this, of course, if you see, we have summarized the entire chapter in under 30 minutes. Now, to understand and sum up your understanding, there is a Google form link in the description box where we have an exam prep test for you. Now, these will be questions which are based on what we have done. And I want you to sincerely take this particular practice test. And in the comments below, I need you to tell me two things. How helpful was this particular session? Did you enjoy it? And secondly, what was your score after taking the test? So that we know how much of this chapter you have understood, thoroughly. And this, of course, is to just test your exam preparedness. Don't worry if your marks have come low. It's just for your understanding. You can always work on it. And now, of course, as you all know, it's a quick reminder for BYJU'S National Scholastic and Personality Test, where, of course, it's happening across the BYJU'S tuition centers, where it's happening on the weekends. And, of course, I think closer we are to 4th and 5th Feb, which is the last date for the exam. You stand a chance, of course, to win a lot of scholarship to BYJU'S Tuition Center, but along with this, you will get a personalized academic report with overall analysis, skill set, subject analysis, career analysis, and career inclinations. So this will also definitely come handy. So in case if you've still not registered, kindly do register. It will help you out. And with this, of course, we come to the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope all of you now feel more confident about the chapter Nutrition in Animals. I did spend my time a little bit for your understanding, but I hope it was helpful because BYJU'S 6 to 8 has always got you covered. And of course, for more of such videos, if you want it, you will have to hit the subscribe button. You have to make sure you show us your love and like this video and share this video with your friends, so that you can help them out. And with this, I'll be signing off. Up until then, everybody, take care. Lots of love to you and bye-bye.